Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're working on Unit 3, where we're going to explore more fundamental HTML concepts. The primary topics for the evening are looking at HTML tables and HTML forms. Tables goes pretty quick. That won't take a super long time. We'll spend quite a bit more time on forms than we will on tables. And then we'll talk about this concept that we call semantic HTML, which is kind of the big movement that happened when we went from the older versions of HTML into HTML5. HTML5 became our operating standard on the web in 2014 officially. A lot of companies such as, Google was one of them that pushed HTML5 much earlier than that when it came out. And people were working in HTML5 really since the late 2000s. And if you're curious, there was a pre-existing standard called XHTML, which was the precursor to HTML5. So we didn't go from HTML4 to HTML5. We went from HTML4 to XHTML and then to HTML5. And there's kind of been a battle between the two formats. Where the XHTML people think theirs is better and the HTML people think theirs is better. And the truth is they're both good, right? And they both work and they're interoperable, by the way, right? So pretty much whatever works in HTML5 works in XHTML with the exception of a few tiny, tiny little things. Most of the time, and I'm just saying this for just reference, if you see an XHTML page, the code in there is practically identical to HTML5 with the exception of how tags are closed, like line break tags, which we mentioned last week, and the doc type. The HTML5 doc type is just doc type HTML. You don't have to put a version number in there. If you look up the doc type for XHTML, oh my God, it's like you'd never memorize it, by the way. And the only way that people remember it is to go somewhere on the web, find it, copy it, and paste it into their document, or you have a tool that auto creates it. But we are working on HTML5, and one of the big moves that happened with HTML5 is they took a lot of common practices that web developers were doing prior to the HTML5 standard and standardized them as new tags within HTML. And we will look at those. So that's like the header, nav, main, article, section, aside, and footer are the key ones. But there's a bunch of other new tags that were introduced. But semantic is a word that has meaning, and not to poke fun at the word, but semantic means it has meaning, literally, right? And so when I put the header tag around something, it means it's a header. Or if with the nav tag around it, it's a navigation item, right? As opposed to like putting a header in, a paragraph. It's different. All right. I'm also going to talk really, really briefly about why semantic HTML matters to SEO and accessibility. It is really important for those two topics because you want to be able to have your pages found. That's SEO. And you want to be able to let people who are blind or hard of hearing or whatever have disabilities be able to access your content. Finally, we'll look real briefly at the div tag, not because I think we're ready for it, but mostly because some of the examples that I have here kind of utilize it. So I just want you to be aware of it. It's really not a big deal. It's just a generic container item. All the topics that I have listed here are referenced here, most of them with a couple different links to give you the W3 Schools perspective, right? Remember, W3 Schools is the organization that sets the rules for HTML5, right? So who knows the rules better than them? Nobody, right? Because they invented them, right? And they're on the website. But you'll notice that I have the Microsoft Developer Network here. That's what MDN stands for. They have a lot of great information on that site as well. So I included some of those references. I also included a link from Free Code Camp where I thought they did a very nice job of explaining this concept about semantic HTML as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and start digging through these materials. And as I'm doing it, I'm going to proceed very systematically. I am going to start by looking first at the W3 School reference on the things, and then I'm going to kind of freeform code as we're moving along. Now, here's how I like to operate. Rather than start to talk about a topic and then create a document and start coding, I'm going to preemptively do file management. File management comes first. It's really super important in web if you're not picking up on that, because we're creating static websites, and static websites rely heavily on the file and folder structure and the hierarchy of it and understanding where stuff is in order to make the code work. So getting that in place first. Then we'll uh, copy last week's work. This is kind of a unique approach. So rather than start from scratch, we're going to take last week's works as a starter, replicate it, fresh copy, and then move forward with the new material. Right? Then I will talk about the topic. So this is going to be my technique. And as we move forward in the future units, I will mention that much more briefly. I will just be doing it during the session. You'll be like, oh, okay, I see why you're doing that now, because you get it, right? So we start with file management. So I'm going to go to my file folder here, and I do have in my Google Drive a folder created for web programming. And normally I would store my work here, and that's where you guys should probably have your unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, unit 4 folders, right? That should be your hierarchy. And then that folder structure you can replicate on our server. Be mindful of the fact that for this unit, I am going to start requiring you to upload your files to the Prometheus web server. So you'll zip your files so I have them that way, and you'll also upload them and share a link. I was very pleased actually that most people got the simple FTP assignment to work without too many problems. And most people who did unit 2 also took advantage of the extra credit point and created a link for the unit 2 work, right? 1 extra point is wonderful if you can get it, so why not, right? So give it a try. If it doesn't work, you're not losing anything. So unit 2 is a great time to practice it. All right. This is not where I store my files. So I have my own file management techniques, right? And not that I'm going to like a deep dive on it, but I have several different accounts on Prometheus. So I have a folder in my Google Drive called Prometheus Utility Accounts. The one I usually do in my academic work and for teaching is my C account. And see my clever username, CCCCC, right? And that's where my stuff is. And then I create a folder for the semester. So web programming fall 25 is what I called it. And I know my naming convention, so I don't have to look it up. It's all lowercase. I put a little dash in there. FA 25 means fall 25 to me. Inside that folder, I have a unit 2 folder. Here's where I'm going to start. I could make a unit 3 folder, go in there, copy the stuff. That's one way to do it. Or I can just copy the folder. I'm going to copy the folder and paste it back in. And then I'm just going to right click and rename. Okay. So here I will get rid of that stuff and just put in the number 3. Be mindful of the fact that my entire folder structure here, everything from, my root of my username to my web programming folder is all lowercase, no spaces. Okay, and here's what I'm going to tell you about that. Why do we do that? I mean, Windows allows for spaces and uppercase letters, right? And it'll open up a web page created that way. No problem. The problem is when you put stuff on a web server, you cannot be 100% certain that the web server you're putting it on will allow for that. If you put a space in the file name or the folder name, when you render it in a browser, you will see a %20 to replace a space. Some servers support it, some servers do not. I will tell you, Prometheus does support it. Okay, so somebody will go like, well, does it matter then? Like, well, okay, you want to do it that way, that's fine. But I know from professional experience, I've been on servers where I upload stuff and it's not working. What is going on? Oh, there's a space. All right, let's fix it, and then we're okay, right? I find that to be less of a problem now than it used to be, but it is still a thing. Now think about what I just did here. I took my unit 2 work and I made a copy. So that way, I'm not doing all my work on the original. I'm working on the revision. The great thing about that is if, let's say I totally screw it up, I can go back to unit 2, repeat this process of copying the folder and start over again, right? So I have a starting point. Next week, when we go to unit 4, we're going to do the same thing. We'll copy unit 3, we'll call it unit 4, and then move forward. So it basically creates snapshots in time of your work in progress, which I think is very helpful. Right? Another thing that you can do, and professionals do this a lot, is if they're about to try something major on a coding endeavor, they sometimes create a copy of the current version just to try something, and then if it worked, then they include that in the original, or make the new version the original, right? But it always, like if you're trying something risky, right? Not that HTML is really risky, but if you're trying something you're not sure it's going to work, it's always good to have a backup so you don't lose the work you've done so far. That's just like a common sense approach. Right? So, all right. So here's my stuff that I had last time. And I'm not going to really alter these too much, but I am going to be adding code. Most of the code that I'm going to add today will be either to the about page, and I think I'm going to make a second an additional page, probably called contact, where I'm going to put my form, right? And I think that that's pretty helpful. So I'm going to begin by opening up Visual Studio Code. So my coding or my files are all ready to go, right? My folder, I mean, they're there. All I have to do is open them. And my coding engine is almost ready because I was coding Python here, you can see. And now what I need to do is go up here and notice when I'm triggering this first icon, this is the Explorer that allows me to see my file and folder structure, but I'm not in the right location. This is Python. So I got to come up here to the file menu, and I'm going to open the folder that I just created inside of my Google Drive. So this is my location for storing it. Yours might be slightly different, but I'm going to be working in Unit 3. In fact, staying in the root folder is fine, right? Just in case I need something from one of the others. So I'm just going to select this folder that I'm in currently, and then I should be able to see all the stuff in the Unit 3 folder. See how that works? So Visual Studio will put a welcome screen up whenever you switch project modes, and you can summarily dismiss that. I'm also going to close the AI chat agent that's built into this product now, and I don't know how many of you have this active, but I think it's there by default. At some point, we will like toy with it, so I can show you like some of the stuff it does. I did last week turn off my AI code assistant tool that just was like generating the Green Bay Packers content automatically. So it's not doing that. So, but you can add those tools later. I think it's really helpful to get the fundamentals of how to code first before you play with those tools. But there's no reason why you can't play with them now as well. All right. I'm going to open up my index file with a double click. I'm also going to open up the about file. I have them both ready to go. Now I'm ready to code. So let's go to the topics back in the unit folder. So I'm switching here back to the folder. So the first topic is talking about tables, right? Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the information here, and then I'm going to go to W3 Schools and look at their content on this, and I am going to do that in the Brave browser. I may even still have the thing open from earlier today, and I'm going to go to their tables page, which I'll drop in the chat here if you guys want to speed up that process. There's the link in the chat if you want to follow along. So tables are basically what they sound like. They're essentially what we call tabular data, which means information organized in rows and columns like a spreadsheet, right? Or a table in a database system. Now, the basic principle is that this structure is one that's commonly used for the same reason spreadsheets are commonly used, because we often get information that needs to be organized. So like we put like pieces of information in a column. So for example, like here we see a table that they have a company, contact, and country column, and then the stuff that's in each row of the table is one complete record of that information, right? And this is called a table. Right? This one, I will tell you, is styled, so it has CSS behind it to make it look kind of pretty. That doesn't come until subsequent weeks, by the way. So next week when we start digging into CSS, I'll show you techniques for styling this. It's very easy to do, by the way. And in fact, if you watch, I think the video at the bottom of the table section here, they show you how to do some of that. If you want to experiment, you're free to do that right out of the gate if you wish. All right, when you're building a table, you have some basic tags that you have to work with. And I'm going to say the three most, is it three or four most basic tags that we have here are the ones that are already on the screen and the ones that I think I require you to do in the assignment. Now, tables, when you're coding them from scratch, if you see, this is a lot of code, right? It starts with an opening and a closing table tag. That encapsulates the entire table, holds it in a container. And I want you to start thinking about this. When I create an HTML element, right, and I create tags, I'm wrapping tags around content. And so if I'm wrapping tags around content, those tags become the container for whatever's inside, right? So the stuff inside is a child element of the parent tag. And tables and table tags like to work best inside table tags, right? So like a TR tag needs to be inside of a table. All right. So the table defines the whole structure. Then we break our structure into rows. And I want you to notice here, I'm highlighting each row. There's an opening and a closing TR tag for each row. And TR stands for table row. Clever, right? Very simple, but clever. All right. The other structure within a row is the table data cell or the column piece of that row. And here I see that I have 3 different TD cells in one row. That means this row has 3 columns. If I want my table to have a consistent 3 columns all the way through, then each one of these rows has to have 3 entries inside of it. If you have one that's got 2 and one that has 4 and another has 3, it's going to give you some problems, right? The real key thing is that the size of those needs to be consistent. If I have 3 columns in the first row, all the rest of them should have 3 columns, right? That ensures it's a table. One tip I give to people, and I think Visual Studio Code does this, and some other editors do as well, is sometimes they have tools where you can go to an insert menu, choose table, and it asks you how many rows, how many columns. You press a button and you have a table. Another approach, real frankly, is I could come in here, right here on the screen, or right from my lecture notes, copy paste into my document and roll. And then all I have to do is change the content. So I'm just giving you this idea here. You don't necessarily have to code all this stuff from scratch. Right. All right. So we learned about table, TR, and TD. And then some of you are noticing, well, that first row has a TH tag, and that stands for table header. When you look at the output of a table header, and actually we'll do it in the Try It editor here, I want you to notice this is really what tables look like in basic HTML format without CSS, so not quite so pretty. But notice the table header row, the text in there is centered and bold, which makes it different than the left-aligned regular text in the rows below. But notice the structure, right? There's also a setting here for width, right? And normally, like if you exclude this, the width is automatically 100%. And we haven't learned about style tags yet, but you can control it. Like, for example, if I wanted the table to only be 70% of the width of the screen, right? Or, and really more correctly, 70% of the width of the containing element. What is containing the table tag? There's a good question. The body tag is containing the table tag. So the body of the document, which occupies the whole screen, if I'm at 70% width, is going to fit 70% of the width of that container. When you have another container inside that container, it'll be 70% the size of that container. It's relative to what you're sitting inside of, right? So this I wouldn't worry about right now. If you want to throw that in, go for it. We haven't learned about style tags yet, but this is called an inline style. We'll learn about that next week. They've also thrown in a style up here in the top part of the document that gives the table a solid black border so that we can see it. Now, I do want to demonstrate something that's kind of weird. I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to run it again. Notice what happens, right? So one of the reasons why we leave this in there, and you can copy this and use it on your own code if you wish, is just to basically see where the structure of the table is. Like, where's this really lining up? Okay. Whether or not you think this is beautiful or not, right? And I'm going to argue this looks like, websites from 30 years ago because that's what they looked like, real frankly. But you can see the basic structure of a table. THs are the headers, right? Which is this stuff. TDs are these, right? Each one of these boxes is a TD. That's a TD, that's a TD. This whole row is a TR. This whole row is a TR. This whole object is a table, right? What you put inside of a table depends. Okay, so I'm going to be doing the Green Bay Packers thing. So for me, I could put in the standings for the NFC North, for example. I could make a table of that. Or I could make a table of a list of the players of the Packers. And I'm going to kind of play with that a little bit. So why don't we do this? Let's go through the trouble of copying their code, right? And I'm going to do this because it accelerates our workflow. So be mindful of that. And I'm going to go to my About page, which happens to be up on screen. And notice on my About page, I'll zoom in a little bit, so you can see the code a little bit better. I have an H1 tag, right, as a header. And I'm not really sure what this page should be called, but, whatever. Maybe this could be the schedule page instead of the About page. I don't know. But if we say About, maybe what I can do is I can have a table of some key players from the Packers, or maybe their schedule or something like that. So since this one is filler content, right? And then I have this paragraph that takes me back to my home page with a link inside of it. I'm going to do this with that. I'm just going to put this all in one line, condense it down. And then I'm going to make a little visual space here. And then I'm going to paste that table structure in. Now, one thing I noticed, this came out to the margin. You see that? I'm going to highlight everything I just pasted in. And I'm going to hit my tab key. Watch what happens. The whole thing shifts over. And what I'm trying to do is show that the table resides inside the body tag. Okay. Some might take it a step further and take the stuff inside the table and indent that as well. And I think that this is really kind of a good way to look at it because it shows you the table tag holds the whole thing. Then there's a row, there's a row, there's a row. The table data or the headers are indented also. So it very easily and quickly shows you how this should be formatted. One cool little trick, by the way, and you guys will probably discover this, is there is a formatting tool here where you can format the whole document to fix all the indents at once, or just the part that you're working on. So this one's kind of done already. Let's do the whole document and see what it does. Okay, it's kind of where I had it, but kind of what I had just done too, right? So that's really a handy trick. So right click format document, and it sets up your hierarchy and your indents for you. Okay, there's a caveat, provided your structure is good. If your structure is broken, that won't work very nicely. Right. So now I have the copied table, and now I got to think of, like, I don't know, column headers here, and I'm not really sure what to put in here, and I'm struggling a little bit to think. Maybe I'll do something like players or players. What else do we need to know? Position, right? And of course, it's auto filling for me, and I don't want it to do that. And then we're gonna maybe the jersey number. We'll just call it number. How about that? So for example, I do like Jordan Love position, and what's Jordan Love's number? I should know this, right? This is embarrassing. I don't know it, but we can look that up. Thank you, Google. All right. So these are going to be my headers. Then I need to have some corresponding information. So the first row here, and if one of you guys could look it up, I'd appreciate it. But I could do like Jordan Love. And notice how, isn't this wonderful? This like AI autocomplete, and I'm not doing this. And I even turned off the tool and it's still auto suggesting. And I'm gonna accept it because that way it saves us the time from Googling it. So the first one will say Jordan Love, quarterback, number 10. All right. How about another Packer player? Name another Packer player. There you go. Micah Parsons. Good choice, by the way. All right. Linebacker, and his number is 11. I'm just going to accept it. Oh, and I did it the wrong way. You got to click on the box and it replaces. So here's a completed table. And you know what, for the sake of example, can we generate one more? And so I'm going to build this one manually. I'm going to type TR, close it. So there's an open and close TR tag. I'm going to press tab to accept the closer. And you know what? I'll go with Devontae Adams, and then close out my table. So there we go. So now I have one more player in there. I'm going to go ahead and do a Control S to save. And now the one thing I didn't do preemptively, and I should have, is I will open up my About page in a browser here on my local system. And this is my output, folks. Okay, granted, this is not the prettiest thing in the world. Right. We will learn more about formatting this stuff as we move forward, and we'll use CSS to do that. In the old days, and I want to say this about tables because this is pretty important. In the old days with tables, when we used to want to style and control their appearance, we would do that with HTML tags, and there's still some legacy tags for tables that still kind of sort of work. But I generally, and I think the HTML standard discourages it now, is like really when you want to show a border on a table, the old way to do it, and I'll just show you really quick, is we would just come up here in the table tag and we would just say border equals 1, right? We would save that and then we go back to our browser and refresh, and this is what you get, which is kind of what we saw before, right? But this approach is deprecated. That means it works, but you really shouldn't use it, right? The approach that they used at W3 schools in the example, right? This approach, you can copy it, by the way, and here it is in the chat if you don't want to copy it and go through all the rigmarole of it. You can add that to the head section of your document. So I'm going to paste it, and then I'm going to indent this stuff because it didn't indent very beautifully. We'll learn, like I said, we're going to learn about these styles next week. But basically, this ensures that I have a border around all the table elements. This just allows us to see it. Okay, Control S to save, back to the browser, not the correct one, and then the refresh. And then you can see yep, I refreshed it. Okay. And the style tags I just put in functionally did exactly the same thing as that border equals 1 thing. If you ever encounter border equals 1, it is legacy code. Still works, but it's legacy code. Styling it with the style tag is better, right? And we'll learn all about these next week, so don't freak out to that piece. All right, so that's basically the table. Now, I do want to talk about a couple more table features here because that's not all there is to tables. All right, so they talked about TDs or table cells. We learned that already. TR stands for table rows, right? And they have examples here again. TH is for the table headers. Okay, got that one too. And then we can look at table borders. Now they give the CSS code for doing this, right? We just borrowed this and used it. They also have a little area here about table sizing, right? And we kind of played with that a little bit too, right? I have no reason to change the size of mine, but here's an example. Now this current width setting, I'm just going to say this, up front of learning CSS, is set to 100%, means the full width of the container. But you can also set it to a specific pixel amount or other various settings, which we will learn about moving forward, right? So for right now, I'm not really super concerned with this. What you'll notice in the browser where I created my table is the table became the size it needed to be, right? Just big enough to hold all the content. You may or may not like that. I'm just saying, right? But right now we're just learning about getting the structure in. We'll style it later. So that's the table width. You can also individually control columns. And normally when you're controlling the width of a column, you would do that in the first row of the table, right? So that one's making it 70% the size of the table. May or may not be what you want, by the way. You can control the height as well, and they show you the code for that. This one they're doing in pixels and not percentages. Be mindful. And then they also talk about the table header tag, which we already learned about. Very quickly going to look at padding and spacing. So when you look at our primitive table and you go, okay, that's nice, right? It's not the prettiest thing in the world, admittedly. And this is kind of like the default output of a table in raw, pure HTML. And no wonder people worked on CSS to style it and make it look better. One issue that I always recommend to people is to create space around objects on an HTML screen because it makes it easier to look at the stuff. So two ways you can do spaces in HTML tables. One is what we call padding, which adds space inside the cell. And the other one's called spacing, which adds space outside the cell. These typically are controlled once again with CSS. So that's coming. You can experiment with it all you want, but it's probably best to wait for the CSS unit for that. There's also what we call column and row span. This is kind of a weird, quirky feature. I don't expect you guys to use this one because real frankly, I see this used very, very seldomly in HTML. People usually find different ways to do it if they're doing something like this. But the concept of column span and row span is like if you're working in an Excel spreadsheet and you're merging cells together. You're taking like 2 cells or 5 cells and making them all one big cell. You can do that either horizontally across columns or vertically across rows, or both is possible. How do you do it? Well, if you're doing a column span, so if I want this cell to span across 2 columns, I just add this little, what they call attribute to the TH. So that first cell, first row of the first 2 columns are combined, and then there's only one other column. Otherwise, the table has 3 columns. So the first 2 here are being combined, and then the third one appears. If you want to look at a row span, similar, but you go in the other direction, then you go to the spot where you want a row span. So instead of having 3 items here, you have 2, and you're going the other direction. But notice how it's a THTD, THTD. It's a little bit different format, right? All right. Real frankly, I don't use these much. I don't see a lot of developers using them much. It's kind of an old school technique, but it does work. It's worthy to know about, and maybe you will get some weird situation where you want to do that. I don't know, right? I will demonstrate it really quick, and you guys can mimic this if you wish, but that's on you, right? Like one approach would be like I could do a TR here. In between the TR, I can do, and it's like it read, I kid you not, this is exactly what I was going to type. I am kind of scared, right? So it's putting in a TH that is a column span of 3 that says Green Bay Packers team roster. I'm just going to press tab and accept it. Why type, right? Yeah. Let go, let AI, basically. All right, so now that's in there. I'm going to go back to my page now and refresh, and you'll see what I created. So that, it's kind of an option. All right. All right. Couple last little tidbits on tables, and then we're moving forward. Tables can be styled, and this is all CSS related things like zebra striping, doing color codes and whatever. You can do all sorts of crazy little things. And we'll learn that more in the CSS area. There's also what we call column groups, where you can symbolically group columns together, usually for very specific reasons, right? So like when you take a column element and put it inside of a column group, that allows us to basically collectively style 2 columns where otherwise we would not be able to. That's kind of the mechanism. Practical tip, I don't use this much. I don't see a lot of people using it. But it's out there, and there it is. All right. So that's how you do tables. And this basically would fulfill our table requirement for this unit. Any questions? Anybody here in class questions on this at all? Okay. Yes. All right. So there's a table included on my page. Maybe not the prettiest thing, but you know what? Not too bad considering. The other little tidbit here would be the semantic tags that go with the tables. And I'm trying to figure out where that stuff is. And I ran into it earlier. And this is the thing I want to show you, and I just want to make you guys aware of this. I'm not requiring that you do this with your tables, but I want you to understand that the semantic stuff that we're about to dive into kind of deeply can also apply to tables. So the one question that people will have is like, why bother to do this? And the general answer is, by containerizing content, it gives us more control over its appearance and more control programmatically, like when we write code for it. You'll notice that this table, this is a pretty basic one. I mean, really, the table would operate just fine with the TR tags, the TH tags, the TD tags. But you notice the top part is put into T head tags, meaning this is the head of the table. Okay. And then we have the body, which has a couple rows in there. And then we have the footer. Now, from a styling standpoint, some of the reasons that we do this, I don't know if they style this or not. Yeah, they don't really style it. But if they were to style it, because all of this is in one container and all of this is in one container, and both of those rows are in one container, we can collectively control them in the output. It also gives the content of the table what we call semantic meaning. In other words, structure that indicates what's contained inside of it. If it's in the body section, that's the info. If it's in the head, it's information about what's below. It's in the footer, it might be a summary of what's above, that kind of thing. So pretty helpful stuff. Not obligatory for the assignment though, right? Good semantic HTML that becomes accessible for all types of users on the web usually features it, right? If you want your page to be semantic compliant or accessibility compliant, but certainly not required to get a table on the screen. We're about at the halfway point now, so I'm going to pause the video. We're going to take a 5-minute break. This is a great stopping point, and then we'll come back at 6:30 and continue. All right, welcome back. We're back from break, and we're going to continue on to our next topic now, which is to talk about HTML forms. Forms are a particularly useful tool in HTML because it's one of the primary mechanisms that we introduced user activity to our web pages. That's really their primary purpose. So an HTML form exists so that we can either capture information or allow the user to interact with what we're doing on the screen. That can be in the form of like typing some information into a box and then hitting a submit button or checking a checkbox or moving a slider or something like that, and then having something happen as a result. But generally what we're doing is we're introducing interactivity to the page. What I will let you know right up front is in this class, we are not going to, let's say mechanize the form. So in other words, we're not going to make the form actually really do much because we need back-end programming typically to really kind of make that happen. However, we can simulate the form working, and we can capture information if temporarily, and we can use some external websites to kind of simulate what might happen with a form. But generally speaking, when you use a form and it captures information, you're sending it to a server somewhere where there's some code running that makes it do something. So for example, if you go to like Facebook and you log in, well, by putting in your username and password and hitting submit, you're logged in, right? And your screen changes, right? So there's an action that happens. All right. The general tag that we start with is the form element. All right. So I have that queued up here in my Brave browser. I'm on the W3 School forms page, and you'll see that there's a bunch of different form entries here. We're going to try to get through as much of this as we can. We are hitting mostly on higher level topics at this point. Forms can be highly nuanced. And with HTML5, they introduced a whole bunch of new form features, and some of them go pretty deep. But our intent here is to introduce you to the concept on a rudimentary level so that you can start using it on your website. Once again, we're not worried a lot about styling at this point, but basically we will be creating something sort of like what you're seeing on the screen here, right? You will have boxes that you can type information into. The boxes are labeled, and you have a button where you can hit the button and it will transport it, in principle, that information somewhere. We don't know where, and then something happens to it, right? That's kind of what an HTML form looks like. On the most rudimentary level, a form has a form tag, and this one right now has an action attribute inside of it. We'll talk about those in a second. But like a table, a form tag is a container. So we open and close the entire form structure with the form tag. So that's the first part of it. You'll notice inside the container that you have a combination of two key types of, let's call them input fields or form elements is probably the correct name for them. One is the input. This is the important part that captures the information, the part I just highlighted, right? And most often when we have an input, the most common setting for it is text, right? So you have a box where you can type some words, right? And that input type has an attribute set to text. Whenever we deal with form elements, and this is kind of a requirement for two different reasons, we give each element an ID and we give it a name. And these are used for different reasons. IDs can be used for coding and for styling, and names are often used for form processing and JavaScript. Normally, when we give it an ID and a name, any object within a form, the ID and the name are synchronous, right? And this helps prevent coding issues later. So you write a piece of JavaScript and you skip the name thing and it doesn't work and you're wondering why. That's the why, right? So most of the input mechanisms that are, usually say input in front of them or similar, we give it an ID and we give it a name, and both are the same. In some cases, we can also pre-populate the text, and this is kind of an interesting thought, right, with a value. If I was to omit this little piece that I highlighted here, let's say I delete that and I run this, you notice the form comes up blank, right? So if you expect, for example, that you have a form for people in the state of Wisconsin and you expect them to enter the city of Racine, you can pre-populate it because like 95% of the people are going to type that because we're in Racine, that type of thing. If you don't know, you just leave it blank. There are some other interesting attributes, like one that's called placeholder. This is a little bit different, similar but different. And I'm just going to be snarky here and just say whatever, right? And I'll run that. And you notice that puts text in there too, but you notice how that's grayed out? So if I type in this one, when I start typing, that goes away. If I type in this one, it just adds to the end of it. That's kind of the difference. So there's placeholder and value, or you don't have to put either one in there. Another thing that we sometimes put in, especially text fields, like if you must have the person's first name, right? You can add this keyword required, and then the form will not allow you to submit it unless that field is filled out. So for example, if I delete this and I hit submit, yeah, okay, well, it doesn't process, I guess. All right, so I can't simulate it here, but basically it would give me an error message that would say, you forgot to fill this out. That's kind of the point. So required makes that happen. I'll show you that in the regular code engine. Now, whenever we do these forms, right, we put our forms elements in there, we often will label things. And this is considered good practice, but I'll have you think about maybe if for how you want to use this, right? Because there are different approaches and there's no right or wrong, right? So some people are really big fans of labeling all their input fields. And we kind of saw this, right? So let's just go back in. So the label here, and you see the label tag, right? Open and close. And then notice it has a for attribute. Okay. Basically, the concept is, what are you labeling? I'm labeling the next box, right? Which is a text box for first name that we're calling F name. So for which one of these ID or names are you labeling? Normally they're going to be together. I want you to notice too, though, that we are putting line break tags in between. So like if this wasn't here and we ran it, the label looks like this. And I don't know, maybe that's a better look for you, right? And, some people might like this look better than the name above look. What I caution people though is if you have like another element, so I'm going to copy the label and the thing, and instead of if you call last name, maybe you just call it like zip, right? Something like that. And even though that's not what it's going to be, and you run it, oops, and I wanted to put a line break here. My point here is to demonstrate that it can make kind of for an uneven appearance, right? So guess how some people solve this problem? They put the form elements inside of a table to make them line up. That's one way to do it, right? The other way to do it is to go back to what we had originally here when we started, which was like this, and you can just put the label above. That's fine too. Okay, so if you put in a label, you have to say what it's for, and usually you put it either next to or above the item. That's typical. What I've seen a lot of people do in the modern era, though, and I'm going to give you like Facebook as an example. So I'm going to go to Facebook here. Notice Facebook doesn't label their boxes. What do? They have placeholder text inside there. So that's an approach too. This is really kind of a stylistic preference thing. So if I was, oh gosh, where was my try it editor that I was working with? All right, one of these is going to be right. Okay, let's just go back here and just start it over again. So one approach would be you can get rid of your label tags. And instead of having a value, I would change that to placeholder. And then instead of like an actual person's name, you could just say first name. And of course, for the last name field, you could say last name, right? And then you got a box like this. Okay, maybe this doesn't look as good, and maybe it would look a little bit better if I threw another line break in here to kind of separate them a little bit. Okay, a little bit better, right? Facebook still looks a little bit fancier, but that's not a bad approach. That works, right? I get the point. That goes for first name, that goes for last name, and it still works the same. So some people do this approach. I really like this approach a lot because it saves screen space. And then when you start like doing what Facebook does, which is styling it a little bit, they got like rounded corners and there's more space in the box, and they're highlighting one box blue, you know, that kind of thing. You can style it very easily to make it look very much like this. All right, so that's an approach. So this is basically building the text field. So the one really common entry type, then we talked about this, is text, right? And that's probably the most default. Right. Then we look at the label tag. We talked about that, but there's some other form elements that we can add. One is called a radio button. This is a kind of fun one, by the way. But you know what? Before I move on to this, why don't we go back to our editor here and let's do a little bit of maneuvering. And if I'm going to create a form, how about a contact form? So I could make a contact page and call it contact, and then I can put my form on that page. So not to start from scratch, but I'm going to copy one of my pages, and I'm probably going to copy my about page right now. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to paste it back in, and then I am going to rename it, and I'm just going to call it contact. All lowercase, no spaces, right, obviously. And there it is. I am going to go ahead, get rid of this style tag. Don't need it. I'm going to get rid of this thing that says about, and I'm going to change it to, guess what? Contact. Makes sense, right? Ideally, I would have links to all my other pages. We'll worry about that later, but we'll get to that. You know, so we'll link up our other pages. And then we'll get rid of the table too, because we're not working on tables here. Instead, we are working on forms. So that's gone. And let's go ahead and make a form. So open and close a form tag. And you know what? I have a hard time not accepting what it's auto typing here because interest of time and speed of delivery. But you see it did a name. And I'm looking at the ID and the name are all name. And then there's email. So the thing is you put your full name in. And then there's also a message, which is a text area. So we'll talk about these other elements here in just a second. But I want you to be mindful of the fact that this layout is actually not a bad one. So I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna go back to our browser where I have my about page open. And now I want to go to my contact page. Here's where I'm going to manually type in the address because I don't have a link to it. It's going to type contact.html. It's in the same folder. And here's the form. This is what I have building basically in my coding tool. Okay, a little primitive, but you get the point. Let's look at the other two elements that are kind of interesting. So we've seen that an input can be of type text, but there is a separate one that can be for type email. And notice I'm giving it an ID and the name of email. And what's the expectation here? That it fits an email format, right? And this is a type that was added to HTML5 when the standard became valid. And I think this is a really good one. They also have ones for things like telephone numbers, I think, and a couple of other really kind of weird ones. Passwords is another one that you can put in there. The other input type that's kind of interesting, and this is one that's required for the assignment, is a thing called a text area. The text area is the thing that creates this bigger box, right? And I want you to notice, like when you create a text area, it has this like weird little handle at the bottom that you can grab and resize. Isn't that kind of interesting? But I can declare in the declaration of the text area how big it is. So let's take a look at the code for that really quick. So here the text area. This is where we're looking for maybe comments or a message or something like that. I'm setting up 4 rows. So 4 rows of text inside the big box instead of 1. That's 1 is the default. And then columns are 50, meaning 50 characters of monospaced text will fit in that box. And I can change those numbers and have more rows or less rows or more columns or whatever. The one anomalous thing about this, and I don't know if you guys have picked up on this, is do you notice that the input tag doesn't have a closing tag? Yeah, it doesn't. And in fact, when we do this in XHTML, and this is one of those notes, you'll see a closing tag inside of it like that because it's required. So you can do it this way and it'll work. But in HTML5, you really don't need it, right? And, you know, I should go back to that required thing. You know, why don't we put in that required so we can show how that works. And now it's dropping in required for the email. Fine, that's fine. And I don't want required there. Yeah, I'm going to say no to that one. So the text area, though, does have an opener and a closer. I don't know why, but the thing that I discovered is if I type some nonsense here, right, and it is nonsense for the moment, and I'm saving it, and I go back here, it adds that automatically to the box. So that's kind of why it exists. So maybe instead of having a label, you could say, type your comments here. You know, I don't know. You can think of a creative way to use that. I often don't put anything in between the text area tags because I want the box to be blank because it's implied that people are going to type comments in. And I don't want required. I don't know why it keeps dropping it in there. All right. You guys catching that? All right. Got rid of it. All right. Then finally, we have the input button at the bottom. And whenever we have a button by default that we put on a form, the type, notice this is also an input, but the type is of type submit, meaning when the people hit that button, the form is sent off to the server for processing. All right. If I don't include a value, the default name for the button is submit. However, I can control what goes on the button. So I could say like enroll now, for example. Okay, so let's save that and we'll go back to the browser and refresh and notice how the button name changes. It's still a submit button. It's of type submit, but I can control what goes on the button. So it could be login, send money now, make bomb explode, you know, whatever goofy thing you can think of putting in there, right? But it should make sense to the task. Like maybe what this is signing up to reach out to somebody. Like you give them your name, you give them your email address and say, hey, please contact me about blah, blah, blah. And maybe it should say subscribe would be a better thing to say here. Subscribe. All right. I am going to be circling back to the radio buttons and checkboxes and stuff, but I do want to go and talk right now about some of the standard attributes that we add to a form tag that are pretty important. All right. So one thing that I typically recommend, if you at any point want to style this or want to put JavaScript on it, which are very common, that you should give your form an ID and a name. And what I would say, and it's auto-suggesting contact form. Okay, I'll just go with that. I think that's reasonable. I would also argue that you should have a name attribute of the same thing, right? And this one is for JavaScript predominantly. All right, and it's auto-typing it for me, so it's hard not to accept that. Then there's two additional attributes that are considered pretty standard on a form tag. The first one is an action. All right, so the action would be a link to a server-side page or a JavaScript file or another web page or a mail to link that would allow you to do something with the form information. So if I had back-end programming involved here, I might have a server script saying process contact form.php, for example, or process contact form.js if it was a JavaScript file. Or if I want this to send an email, and this is actually a pretty good thing to do as a first contact form thing, you can have it send an email to a certain email address. So when you hit the submit button, it'll take the stuff that was typed in the form, drop it into the body of an email message, and put that email address into the to field. Okay, that might be helpful. Another thing that you can do, so that that's probably the one I recommend that you guys do initially. But let's also talk about the method tag. Right. This one's kind of a little more heady to talk about, but basically it has to do with when you fill out a contact form, what is displayed in the URL bar after you hit your submit form. And I'm going to demonstrate something really weird. If I go to Google, and that's not where I want to go. I just want to go to straight like google.com here. All right, there we go. So I have a search box, and let's say I'm searching for sandwich, right? And I hit enter on that. I want you to notice up here in the search bar that the URL is repeated. It tells me I'm on like a search page, and then there's a question mark, and then there's a Q, which stands for query, like a database query. And then it has the word sandwich. The word I typed in the search ends up in the URL, right? And then there's a bunch of other gobbledygook that Google put in there. But generally speaking, if I'm creating a contact form and the method, which is default, by the way, is set to get, whatever is in the contact form will transmit in the URL. And that's considered generally unsecure and not a good practice. It's interesting that Google does it. If you switch this to post, the contents of what you typed will be obscured from the URL and is considered more secure, right? It doesn't mean it's actually secure. It seems more secure. People aren't seeing it. They can't, in other words, they can't copy your thing from the URL bar, right? And most people don't even look. But generally what I tell people is the default is post and you go with it. They do have this encoding type that they were trying to add to the end, and I don't think that's super important, but like if you were to submit a video, it would have a different encoding type than text, but what we're sending right now is text. So I think this is a pretty good example, and what I'm going to do here is I am going to make the email address shorter, right? So I'll say like that, just so it fits on the screen here a little bit better. But let's go ahead and take all of this, right? Save it, right? So I'm saving it. Let's see what it looks like in a browser now. Wrong browser, sorry. Once again, the wrong browser. One of these days I'll get it right. So we're going to refresh, right? So you have my subscribe button. I don't know if you guys recall, but I did put a require on this, on both of those, and I'm going to type in a message and I'm going to hit subscribe. And notice, by virtue of adding required for the name and the email field, if I don't fill them out, it won't let me move forward. Now notice what happens when I do the email and why we use email as a type. Basically what this does is it enforces not only that you type something in, but that you put it in the form of an email address. So for example, I don't know, whatever, now it's okay. So one of the reasons why we do that is to kind of enforce that aspect of it. All right, so far so good. By the way, where we're at right now is about all you need to earn the points for the form assignment or form portion of the assignment for this unit, right? But now I'm going to show you some of the other higher level things. And did you guys notice when I hit subscribe, it brought up my email program, even though this is not the one I use, but it did bring that up. Maybe I should do this very quickly too. Another thing that you can do is instead of going to, and I apologize here, sending a mail to link, another option would be to send people to a different page. Now, I can send people to the about page because I have one, but sometimes what I do is I create a thank you page, right? Where people fill out the form and it goes to a thank you page and it says, oh, thank you for filling out our form. And then they can get to another part of the website. It makes it seem like something happened, but truly nothing did. Once again, when you learn back-end programming, you will put a piece in there that takes you to a server script that actually does something with the information, either logs you in or stores it in a database or processes it somehow before the next action happens. So play with that a little bit. I'll just demonstrate this one just so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to refresh, right? And I'm going to type in some stuff and whatever and hit subscribe. And it took me to the about page, right? And you can imagine if this was a thank you page, it's like, thank you, we've got your information, expect to hear from us soon. So that might be something that you could do. And remember, right now it's not real, but whatever. Let's go back. Then let's go back to W3 here and take a look at the next structure type. This next structure is called a radio button. And I'm just going to bring this up on the screen so you can see what this one looks like. And you can play with this. And in fact, what I recommend doing if you want to play with this stuff is you could, verbatim, just copy this stuff and drop it on your page. So I'm going to just copy this and put it here. I'm going to put it above the subscribe button and above the message box, by the way. And maybe do that. And I'm going to indent these. All right. Saving. And then let's refresh in the browser here and see what it looks like. Okay, that's it's a little late. I want you to look at the anatomy of this though, with the radio buttons. And maybe it's easier to look at it on W3, but these are my radio buttons, right? And each one of them has a label, but notice that the label is placed after the input. So we're labeling it, but instead of putting it before, now we're putting it after. Some people don't like this approach, some coders, right? And so what they do is instead of using the label tag, which is really more proper, better semantic HTML, they'll just say HTML, and they'll just say CSS. And so you can replicate this. But what I would argue also is I'm putting these radio boxes up and it really kind of lacks context. So I might actually create some text here, and it might be in the form of a paragraph where I say, what coding languages do you know, right? And close the paragraph. And I don't know why I did an uppercase P, probably because I typed an uppercase P, but let's fix that because that's not correct. Okay, tag should be lowercase. Let's save that, go back and look, refresh, okay? And you see how that's a little more leading you to click on the box. Okay, I see my JavaScript thing is bumping me up into my message label. That's not good either. So let's fix that. So JavaScript is bumping up here. So here I'm going to do 2 line breaks after JavaScript, saving and refreshing, and here it is. Much better, don't you agree? All right. Radio buttons have an interesting feature. We know they're radio buttons, A, because they're round. But when you have a radio button, I want you to notice, I can't click all 3 of them. I can only click one of the 3. There's a reason why that happens. So like, and maybe the question here really, which coding languages do you know best, right? Because you might know all 3 of those languages, so it's a better question. But I want you to notice here that all of these are inputs of type radio. Notice that? The ID matches the content, so HTML, CSS, JavaScript. But notice here that the name for all 3 of those objects is the same. This is kind of weird, right? But that's what makes the radio button have an exclusive choice, is that mechanism. So ultimately, the name is the favorite language. CSS will travel with it, or HTML will travel with it, but only one of them can be true. Only one of those can hold the name. It'll be the one that you click. So these are kind of fun to add if you want to add this to your form. So, and I'm showing like a practical usage of it. All right. Let's go back now to W3, and I'm going to take us now to what I know is next, which is checkboxes. And let's bring those up on the screen. And checkboxes, conversely, unlike radio buttons, right, very similar, right, layout, are boxes where you can check all of them. right? So for example, what vehicles types do you own? I have a bike, I have a car, I have a boat. All right, why don't we grab all this and let's add that to our form too. And what I might suggest, right? Like if it gets a little convoluted and crowded and hard to read, you might want to actually start breaking your content apart a little bit. This is just kind of a, create some visual space in there for yourself, so you can see where stuff is. Like this is my radio stuff. This is my email and name field. This is my message box. This is my subscribe button. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'll create a blank line and I will paste in the checkbox code. I'll indent this stuff. There we go. And then I'm also going to add one additional line at the top and we'll make it a paragraph. And I don't know what the question should be here. The question should be something like, yeah, what vehicles do you own? Correct. Thank you, AI, for reading my brain and just doing my work for me. I'm going to go ahead and do a save on that. And I want you to notice the anatomy of this. Once again, there's labels. They come after the box, right? It's just kind of an aesthetic thing. And some people, real frankly, a lot of coders will not use the label tag at all, and they might do this. I'm just going to do one of them like that so you can see that it's fine. But then notice type checkbox, right? The vehicle ID is vehicle 1, vehicle 2, vehicle 3. I'm not sure if that's really the best vehicle. I might argue that it should say bike, car, boat. That's how I would do it. And notice here that the names are all different too. And the reason why is that you can select all three. That's the why. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. Let's go back to our browser and take a look. Are you guys feeling that groove? Like do some code, save, go take a look. Oh, I got to tweak it a little bit, save it, go back and take a look. Right. And then when you're all done, you upload it to the server. Right. So what vehicles do you own? I have a bike, right? I have a car, I have a boat. Right. What language do you know best? I don't know. HTML probably. And then of course the name is required, the email is required. And I have that data and I type the message and I hit subscribe and it takes me to the about page. Maybe the email thing is better. I don't know. Right, but that's a checkbox, folks. More stuff that you can control. The submit button. Well, we've been playing with that all along, right? But just keep in mind that whatever thing is the submit button on the page will ultimately trigger the action in the form tag. And most of the time it'll be in the form of a link. Now, if you can imagine that if you write a PHP script, and that's a class you take, in the web program too, and the PHP script validates the information and then maybe checks to see if your password is valid or something, and then maybe either logs you in or takes your information and puts it in a database or sends a message to the system server or something, like that. That's a script that you write and place on the server and executes on the server. And I think that's kind of an interesting thought to have. All right, so the submit button submits the information. The other button that's kind of helpful is and this one I don't really use very often on forums, and I don't think a lot of people do, but there is an input button that's called reset. And you know what, since a W3 doesn't have an immediate thing on it, there it is if you guys want to copy it. The reset button, guess what that one does? It clears the form. So that can be kind of helpful. So I'm going to put that on a separate line. Maybe it could go on the same line. I don't know. You guys can judge what looks better. But let's go back here and notice the reset button, and notice my form is filled out. And when I hit reset, all the content is clear. Right. So maybe an option is like reset and start over. Whether or not you like those on the same line or not, that's highly subjective. To me, it seems like one line break is not enough. Like they were touching too much or something. So I think that maybe this will look a little better, okay. Maybe it would look better on the same line. Heck, I don't know. So, experiment with what you think looks good. You could just maybe put a space in between it and that would be adequate. Right, oh, okay. Let's do it on the same line just to prove that point. Saving and then refreshing. There it is. Subscribe, reset, whatever. I'd say the reset button's pretty optional these days. There's a couple of other HTML form elements that are pretty useful that we will learn about. Like for example, okay, we learned about the action tag. We also looked at the, we haven't talked about this one, the target attribute, which sets where the form ends up. So if it opens up a different page, does it open up in the same window? We'll talk about this when we talk about links, so don't worry about that one right now. But usually if you're processing a form, sometimes you go to a blank page, or sometimes you go back to the page you were already in. We talked about the get and the post. Generally speaking, you usually want to use post. There's times where you use get, but that's kind of the new standard. If you don't include a method, and I think this is probably the most important part of it, get is the default, which probably isn't what you want. Right. And I think that is all explained here pretty well. There is an autocomplete feature that you can add, and I'd say this is more advanced, so I would worry about that, and a couple of other validation related things. Let's go to the form elements, and I just want to show you some of the other things that are available. I'm not going to demo these, but I'm just going to show them to you really quick. So if you want to add additional stuff, you can do this, right? So I'm going to go through them really quick. We talked about the input element, right? We played with this with text and email and checkboxes and whatever. There is a different element called select. This one's kind of interesting because this basically gives you a drop-down box and with options. So take a look at what this does. Choose a car. Right, so you can pick a car. So if you want to add one of those, it's pretty easy to do. Just follow this format right here. Another one that they have is, which is the sub item of select, is called option. Right. The other thing that you can control when you're doing these is how much of the list appears. The first way we did it just has the first item in there. With this approach, you can have multiple things visible at the same time. It's kind of an aesthetic choice. I usually don't like this approach, but sometimes it is appropriate. But it's basically, it's functionally the same element. If you add this attribute to it, then you can go ahead and select more than one item. So you can hold down your control key and select more than one. That's a thing. And then, of course, the text area, which we've already played with. Yes, yes. And another one. Okay, so we have an input of type submit, but then you can also create, and this is really kind of a bizarre concept here, but you can make standalone buttons on a page. And normally when we do standalone buttons, we don't usually put them inside of a form. So this is weird, but you can as well, right? So the concept is you could put a button anywhere on a web page using the button tag, and then you say it's a button of type button, okay, which is a little redundant. And then on click, which means you clicked on the button, you can actually run a snippet of JavaScript. And what this is brute force JavaScript right here, right? We're just forcing JavaScript onto the page. You can also call a JavaScript file to run, which is probably more normal. But actually, this is kind of a fun one to throw on there. So just let's just do it just because it's so easy to do. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to put this below the form, like way down here somewhere. I'm going to do a couple of like line breaks, and then I'm going to drop this in. I'm going to save it. And watch what happens here when I refresh the page. Pretty groovy, right? So this is like your first tiny little taste of JavaScript. This is called an alert box, right? Also known as an annoying pop-up, right? So you've learned how to create an annoying pop-up with not a lot of effort, right? And that message can say anything. The one snarky, funny thing I sometimes do is like I'll say, click OK to erase your hard drive. Right? It's not really going to happen, but it freaks people out, which and I think it's funny. So, take it for what it's worth, and there it is. Click OK to erase your hard drive. Of course, it's not really doing it, but you know, you can get ideas. Now, if you think about the fact that when we can put buttons on a page, and we can trigger either a JavaScript file, which can contain a complex program, or we brute force add some JavaScript to the button. We can do some pretty powerful stuff here with these buttons and create interactivity just about anywhere. Right. But one of the points of this is that when you put a button on the page, it looks like a submit button, but really it's not part of the form. And that's totally a doable thing. So it's kind of like let's call it a standalone form element, but it can be included in the form if you wish. There's also this field set and legend thing. This I don't see used a lot, but in the old days, if somebody was putting together a really complicated HTML form with a lot of content areas and wanted to separate the content, they would use this. And once again, field set is a container, and then the legend describes it. And let me just show you what that does. It basically puts a box around anything. So the legend puts the text up here in the border of the box, and field set puts a box around it. You can control those things with CSS. For all I know, you like this look. To me, it looks very 1999, and normally when I do still see this, it's because they have this like super complicated form and it's broken into sections so that you can process one part of it at a time, right? Like this is your personal information, here's your financial information, here's your job history, whatever, right? And then you got a button, right? Just nice, convenient way to group things. You can feel free to play with this to your heart's content. I'm not going to do much more of a demo on it. All right, back to Brave here. And we're almost done with the form elements, and I am watching the clock here to try to get through this remaining material. There's a bunch of newer things that have been added, and I'm just going to like fly through these really, really quick. One of the new elements for forms is a data list, which is very similar to the select option box, by the way. Just a very quick look, right? So notice how it's similar, but not quite the same. That's kind of cool. The output element. And notice you can put things like, this is a range control, by the way. And notice how it like dynamically updates the number. I would call this kind of advanced, so I wouldn't play with this too much here. But I do want to make you aware of it. The basic input control, we learned what? Text, submit, I guess button, email. I want you to see that there's a whole bunch of different types of input controls. Things for passwords, for numbers, for dates, for times, URLs, for weeks, for files, right? Like say, if I did input type file, it would put a file dialog box on my web page, right? And all of these, I think none of these are hot links, but they do have examples of all of them here, right? And I think these are pretty interesting. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you can explore all these different input types, not needed for our assignment. But when you get into more advanced form development, remember forms are the number one way we interact with the users. This becomes very pertinent quickly. Input attributes become important. Remember, attributes are the things we put inside of a tag. And so you can study this page to see like what kind of stuff you might do and some of the different things that you can do as well. I think one of the more fascinating input types, by the way, is this one, like hidden. So you can create an input field that contains information that the users don't see, right? And people go like, why the heck would you do that? Here's an example of why. I used to do a lot of e-commerce websites, and somebody would click on a product and I would always have a hidden input field added that would have the weight of the like the shipping weight for the product. The user doesn't really need to see that, but it's important in the shipping calculation. So that's an example. And well, please feel free to play with these input types and experiment. I think some of the fun ones, for example, are like you can do color and it gives you a color selection box, or you can do date and it gives you a calendar and you can click on the calendar date, or you can get a file dialog box. And I like these a lot. And here's the why. Because in the old days, in order to make that kind of stuff happen, we would have to do some really fancy programming in JavaScript. And in HTML5, it's just part of HTML5. I can just drop these in and it's like, oh my God, that was really easy. And it looks amazing. Right. And you should experiment with those, to kind of figure that out. So we have input attributes and form attributes, but I think we've covered all the major form items. If you follow basically what I did here as an example, you're fine for a form. But I think that if I remember right, the assignment doesn't require most of this. But it's kind of fun to play with. We need to get some sort of a form on the page. Okay. Let's now start talking about the next topic here. And I'm going to go back to our unit folder here. And notice like all the stuff we talked about, right? Text area select and buttons and all that stuff. I did want to talk about the div tag because here in this like lecture note thing, I had an AI engine help me generate this code here for inclusion on this page, and it wrapped everything with a div tag. Now, a div is one of these topics that we'll talk about. So I'm going to just do this here. And basically, a div tag in HTML is a way to containerize content. It has no styles attached to it. It's not like a paragraph where it adds like a space above and below. It doesn't make your font a different color, bold or big or anything like that. It just wraps content. And then usually what people do is when they're working with a div, somewhere on a web page, and notice, even though this is in the middle of the text when it renders, you guys notice that it comes on its own line. So a div tag is what we call a block level element, meaning it occupies the whole width of the screen wherever it's placed, unless you control it otherwise. But it's a generic container, and usually what we do with these is we normally give them an ID, like some sort of a name or something, and then or a class or both, right? That allows us to further, identify or control the object, right? Normally, and this is going to lead into the semantic HTML talk, we would do stuff like we would wrap div tags. Like if I had a header part of my web page and then a navigation part of my web page and then a footer and a body, in the old days of HTML, we would create div tags, and I would do goofy things like saying div header, for example. And then the people who designed the HTML standard are like, well, all the web developers always create header areas, and they wrap a div around it and they call it div header. Then they make navigation and they call it div ID nav, and then they make a body or a side or a footer or something like that, and they call it div ID footer, right? So somebody was like, oh my God, why don't we just create new tags, right, for HTML that are semantic, that instead of doing this, so this is exactly what I was talking about. This is what we used to do in the old days. I'd build my page structure and I would containerize the sections of the page so I knew what was in there, right? And then even more importantly, I could style it all together. Like I could make the header have one background and the nav have a different one and the content have a different one, and the footer have a different one, and then control them with JavaScript too, right? And then when they rewrote the standard, they're like, why don't we just make tags called that? Okay, makes sense, right? And so instead of using a generic container and giving it an ID, we just have native tags that are semantic. In other words, the tag name is indicative of what it is. And if you follow this format for your website and put your websites into the structure, it also helps people with accessibility issues. So like if you're have like a screen reader, they'll say header, you know, Joe's page, navigation, you know, home, about, contact, gallery, you know, that kind of thing, main content, you know, that kind of thing. And it knows that because of those semantic HTML tags. So one task that you have is to take this type of a structure and start to wrap it around your content. It's really pretty easy to do, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my original index page here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm also try to zoom out a little bit. I'm also going to do my word wrap because I notice it's not wrapping. And then I'm going to start wrapping the HTML tags, the semantic tags around my content. So for example, I'm going to look at this and go, okay, is there anything here that I would consider the header? Okay, so here's what I would consider the header. Maybe historic Lambeau Field isn't really a part of it, but I'm going to say that these 3 H tags here might be part of the header. So let's do this. I'm going to create a blank line. I'm going to type the header tag, right? And it'll close it, and I'm going to copy. Okay, so it's doing it for me, so I'm just letting it. I'm letting go and letting AI, folks, right? And so it figured out pretty quickly, okay, that looks like your header content. All right. This next area here, right now I got a paragraph tag wrapped around it, but I'm about to ramp this up, and I'm going to switch this to a navigation tag because I want this area here. I really don't want it to be a paragraph linking to my other page. I want to create a navigation, right? What pages do I have so far? I have, well, actually, I have 3 of them, right? Let's think about this. I have my home page. Notice how it's just like doing my work for me. I have a contact page and an about page. All of them are local files, right? They're all in the same folder. So the href, the link text, just points back to the same folder where it will find those files. Now, if I have additional menu entries, I can add them to the navigation here. Right. From the navigation area, we then go into the main content. So we will have a tag called main, right? And I'm going to wrap that main tag. And it didn't figure that out yet, did it? Right. And I'm going to put that. You know what? Let's end the main section. Oh gosh, I'm hemming and hawing here a little bit on this. I think I'm going to put it here. And notice how it's suggesting that I do a footer right away. So I'm going to do that. All right, I'm going to create a footer. And thank you, AI, for fixing my code for me. And I'm just going to accept it. The one thing I am going to move down here, though, is I think I'm going to take my email link and put it in the footer because I think that would be good. But I want you to notice what I've done here really quickly is I've restructured my page into a structure where there's a header area, a navigation, the main content, right? Now that's a pretty long section, and then the footer, right? So I have this consistent content. What's inside those tags matches what the semantic tag indicates. And once again, I can style them collectively, control them collectively, etc. Different backgrounds or what have you. Now, when I start to build a page structure like this, and this is something you guys are going to have to do on your own, is if my one page looks like this, and I should save it and take a look, right? The first thing that you're going to notice in the browser when I take a look is when I go to the home page, it really doesn't look different. You catching that? Yeah, it doesn't really look very different. However, that structure is there. When I start to apply my CSS next week, right, and put a background on the header, well, all of a sudden, this whole top part of the page is going to look different than my navigation. And this navigation area is going to turn it eventually into a navigation bar. And then we'll have our content, and then we'll have our footer. And guess what, folks? This will start looking like a real website. It's going to go from this plain HTML ugliness to like, oh, wow, that's pretty good without a lot of effort. And then that's kind of the point. So the challenge here really is to take this semantic structure, and it's maybe easier to look at it here in the lecture notes, but basically this semantic structure, which all goes inside the body tag. And one common mistake I see with early coders is they'll take the header and put it in the head part of the document. By the way, wrong thing to do. Don't do that, right? And that's not correct. So I'm trying to get back down to the content. So please don't do that. Don't put the header in the head section. All of these tags would go inside the body, right? There are a couple of other semantic tags that are very common. One is called a section. So like normally I would put a section as a sub area of the main content. So I have like maybe the top part of the main content might have an image and an abstract. And then I have the content area where maybe I have like a little blurb, with a section. And then I might get into the main body of the article, right? Like if it's an article, so I might go from like an image to a blurb to the article itself, which is the main text. And then the aside is usually when we make sidebar entries. For right now, I'm not too worried about section and article, but if you start building complex pages, it really makes sense to containerize the content. Once again, well, this is a new section. This is a whole article. This is an aside or a sidebar entry, right? And it tells you here the kind of stuff that you might put inside each one of those things, right? And I think that's a pretty helpful guide. Now, the whole concept of this, right, is, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so you can see this whole structure here. And this is kind of like an ASCII art version of a web page, where we basically have like the header, right? And maybe our navigation might be included in the header or might be a separate area. Then we have the main, which is kind of a large area that contains the article and the sections. Then we have an aside, and even though here it's kind of below, it might be on the sidebar. And then we have a footer, and it's a very, very common web page structure, one that we're very used to seeing, especially mobile web pages fit into this format. All right. Now we need to talk about why this matters, why semantic HTML kind of happened. And the one reason was why we use generic containers and we'd always label them the same. And somebody's like, well, why don't we just make tags for these? Okay, makes sense. But three key reasons why we do this. Accessibility really becomes one of the more important ones, right? So like if you work, especially for big enterprise environments or a school, for example, or you expect any of your visitors to have any sort of disability, vision and hearing are typically the two big ones, but vision is a really big one on the web. But do you guys know that blind people can surf the web? It's totally a thing. Accessibility becomes very important. So when your content is semantically labeled, the screen readers can understand it and explain that, oh, this is a new section to the person listening to the web page rather than seeing it, right? Because somebody can see it, can tell, like this, well, this looks like a new section here. Oh, look, there's a divider, right? But a blind person can't see that, right? So that's kind of the point. The other reason is when you start to publish your web page, you want people to find it like through Google, like search you and find you. What you put inside those areas tells the search engine what's important, right? Well, what's the content of this web page? Well, that's in the main area. If this is an article, where's the actual article? Oh, it's in the article tag. Or where's your navigation? Well, that's in the nav tag. You see the thinking of that? And that way the search engine would know, like if it's really looking at content, it might skip the header and the footer and the nav and go right to the content, like the main or the article, to get the real content of the web page. That's the point, right? So very important for SEO. from the coder's perspective, when you have that structure and it's the same structure on every page and it repeats, then you have this website that is very consistent. Now, right now, my website is not. When I'm on the homepage, well, I'm starting to build a navigation and I have a header. But when I go to the contact page, where's my header? Where's my navigation? Right? It's not there. So part of your challenge here with this one is to take that semantic structure and start replicating it on all of your pages. So all your pages should have a header, a nav, a main, and a footer at the very least, right? You can do sections, articles, and asides whenever you want, if you want. But those four, header, nav, main, and footer, I think are pretty critical to be on every web page. So convert your pages. So take all of your pages. Like I could take my about page and I could go over to my index page and copy the structure. In fact, think about it. The header is probably going to be the same on every page. The nav's probably going to be the same on every page. You just copy them verbatim and paste them on the next page. You wrap main around your content area, wrap footer around your footer stuff, and maybe your footer will be the same on every page. Right. So real good practice, by the way. I know we are a little bit over time, and you guys, if you need to go, please feel free to go. But I do want to do wrap up on the lecture because I feel it's pretty important. I think we hit all the key concepts here, right? So key conclusions and takeaways: use tables for tabular data only, and it says not for layout. Now, the reason it says that, guess what? In the old days, we used to use tables to lay out pages because we didn't have other structures to use, and they worked well, right? And that's not really what you should do now. It says always use label tags with inputs. I would contest that a little bit, but it is, at least from a semantic and accessibility aspect, I do think that's important, right? So if you're concerned about accessibility and SEO, absolutely use label tags. Will it work fine without? Yeah, I demonstrated it that it does. It looks just fine. Select the right type of input tag for whatever form type of thing you're building. And then also restructure all your pages so that you do have the semantic structure. And like I said, header, nav, main, and footer especially, right? We haven't really worried too much about divs, but divs become a very useful object too, and we'll see that later on. Especially when you have like types of content that don't fit into a category that makes sense, and you just want to containerize it. Div is a generic container. Writing semantic HTML is crucial for making your websites accessible to everyone and discoverable by search engines. Right, so those are the important takeaways here. The assignment itself for this unit is listed here. Now, when I list assignment criteria like this, I want to make sure that you guys complete all of these bullet points, right? I don't want you to just do a couple and then go, all right, I think that's good, right? I want you to make sure that you read through each one of these, complete all the tasks listed, and yeah, and maybe I might reword a little bit of this because I go header, main, footer, section, and what am I missing here? So I'm gonna alter this on the fly, by the way. Isn't that fun? When your teacher changes his mind. Because we should have nav here, I think is a really important one. At least I think so. And I'd say those two, let's call those optional. So I'll do that. Just editing on the fly, just make sure it's up to date. The table, we just need a table TR, TD, and TH, right? Just a basic table. Add a form to the page. You should have text, email, text area, submit button. We already did it, right? Do a mail to link. It's probably the best thing, or you can link to a page if you wish. We'll learn how to style the stuff later. We got a little flavor of it today. You can validate your pages. You should always do that to make sure your code's right. Make sure all the links in your pages allow you to go to all of the other pages on your site. So think about this. If I replicate my nav structure on every page, I should be able to go from any page on my site directly to any other page on my site. So this is something you need to start building to ultimately get to a complete site. Make sure you use proper HTML structure. The validator will help you. Make sure there's no errors. Of course, if you make errors, your Visual Studio Code should highlight it in red, and you can try to fix it. And if you get stuck, you can always reach out to me. And I think that's pretty good. And I think I have some redundant stuff in here. So you can see I'm like editing myself on the fly. I already talked about the validator. So let's just make sure. I mean, that is kind of redundant, right? Yeah, it is. It is kind of redundant. And what I'm going to do here, and I apologize for kind of editing this on the fly, but I think it's kind of fun to watch your teacher fumble a little bit too. So there you go. I think that reads a little bit better right there. All right. So when you're done, make sure you upload your files to Prometheus. So this time you got to move your whole folder structure over. And notice I'm giving you an example here. At this point, you should have a root folder inside your main folder called web programming or something like that, and then a unit 3 folder that you'll append to the end of your URL. Make sure you test your site in the browser, zip all your code files, and then give me some comments about how it went. Now, if it's helpful for you guys, I'm going to go ahead and do an upload of this really quick, what I just did, even though it's messy and ugly. And just to kind of repeat the process, and then we'll call it a night. So I'm going to bring up FileZilla here. And then in my local folder structure where I'm residing right now, I can see all my files. And I'm actually going to go up one folder level, right? So my goal really is to move that entire folder. I'm going to log into Prometheus. So we kind of like demonstrated this before, but it's prometheus.gtc.edu. You need to have an account with a password. And then I always struggle to remember mine. So it's weird and complex. And I'm in. All of my work this semester is going into this folder, right? So now my goal is to find my unit 3 folder here and move it over. So I'm on my Google Drive, right? You can see there's my C account. Here's my fall folder. There's my unit 3. All it takes to upload it is a drag and a drop, folks. So it's got the whole folders moved up. Now I go to the browser and test. Here's a tip. Go into your folder. And if you have a page called index.html, all lowercase, you can take this folder name and append it to the name of your user account on Prometheus, and you will get there. So I'm going to copy that from that bar right there. Now I'm going to go to my browser, and I'm going to type prometheus.gtc.edu. I'm going to do a /. I'm going to add my user account name, tilde, the sideways squiggle, CCCCC. I'm going to paste in the file and folder structure. And there's no file name here, right? Because index is going to load automatically. I'm going to press enter, and there's my page on the server. All right. For those of you here in the session, because I haven't published this to the rest of the class yet, here's your direct link. So if you want to copy my code, you can go into my pages, right click, view source, check it out, borrow it, and tweak it. That's totally fine. Right. And that's what I would do. So why would I discourage you from doing it? So please play with that. It is required when you submit your homework that you give me a working link this time. So you got to practice that skill a little bit. But you have to structure your folders on both sides to make sure that they jive, right? The other thing that you should always do at this point, and I recommend that you do it every time, is you can take that entire folder, if you wish, and you could do it from here if you want, and compress it to a zip file and send that along with your submission. So give me a link and give me the zip file. If the link doesn't work, I can grade your zip file, right? And then I can coach you on fixing the link. But if I don't have that and the link doesn't work, then I can't give you a score. See the issue there? The other benefit of that is I have a backup of your files. It's like, oh man, I deleted my unit 3 stuff. Well, that's okay. I got it. I'll give it to you. All right, folks. Hopefully you found this stuff helpful. That'll be it for this video and for our session tonight. I will stop the video.